Hello everyone and welcome back to Art and Chat. Today we're going to work on another recycling my old paint and turning it into a new painting. But first I want to start off by opening this linseed bottle. When I tell you guys it was a struggle, it was a struggle. I put it off for a few days and I figured I had to finally get it done. My paints were drying out and I needed to prepare and store them for this painting. So I wanted to keep the bottle intact. That's why I didn't go too hard with opening this. But it took so long. But I think I did a good job. I was able to reseal the bottle and I changed the container that I wanted to put it into this pill bottle. I was going to put it originally in glass, but I decided against it. I just repurposed an old pill bottle because I'm going to end up using this pretty soon. Since this is a recycling project anyway, it was better to reuse a container I already had instead of buying a new jar to put my linseed oil in. And it's something I'm used to doing. I repurpose my bottles in jars all the time to put different things in. Oil, ink, herbs, all types of stuff. So the only issue was I then had to struggle with getting the label off. We're having a day. So the next day is when I decided to put on my label and to start preparing my paints. So I originally had more than my Halloween paint. I had this paint left over from oil paint study of flowers that I did. I actually posted it here on the channel, so I'll put a link in the description and I'll put a link in the card. But I have these beautiful shades of blue and purple and green, and I thought, well, hey, might as well reuse it. But I have a terrible habit of letting my paint start to dry out. So instead of throwing it away, it creates a crust because the paint starts to oxidize when it's in a pile. I just lift the crust, remove the dried paint, and I add linseed oil. Here you can see me removing that crust and adding linseed oil to both the green and the yellow. Now, as I go through this process, you'll start to notice that I have a very little amount of some of the colors. For example, this purple. So instead of just using this purple or letting it dry out too fast, I'm adding what's left of the blue and creating a new color, which is perfect for our winter landscape because I use a lot of blues and purples and yellows to really highlight the white of the snow. So it's a good deal for me. Next, I'm going to remove my paint piles that I've made and I'm going to add it to a new sheet of glassine paper. This paper is archival. It's used for a lot of artwork, so it's good to use for this, and it's a lot smaller, so I'll be able to put it in a container and keep it from drying out as fast. This palette here is my Halloween palette. It's what I have left from my Halloween paintings. As you can see, I have a lot of browns, a lot of blues, and that's a perfect palette for this winter landscape that I want to do. I also have a little bit of green, a little bit of yellow, and some red. It doesn't really look like red, it's really dark here, but that area next to the yellow, that's a really rich, dark red. I believe it's alizarin crimson. It might be a mix of alizarin crimson and brown. I'm not exactly sure, but this is going to be my main palette. the main colors that I'm going to be using. One, because there's way more color here, and two, it's because it's the perfect colors for this new painting. Of course, I'm going to have to mute them because they're quite vibrant. They are quite vibrant. And I want a winter cold scene. Well, that's essentially what I was going for. It became a little bit more light and airy and sweet and more illustrative than I originally wanted it to be, but I really liked how it came out, and I really like the colors. Again, as I go through these colors, I'll notice that there's a little bit more of this color, a little bit less of this color, and I'm remixing to make a new palette and also to combine the colors so there's less wastage. Again, I told you guys I have a terrible habit of leaving my paint out. So this is actually the next day. I finished adding my linseed oil to everything and putting it on this piece of glassine paper. I also put a napkin underneath it just to make sure there was nothing leaking out of the bottom. And of course, you can see some of the paint started to dry a little bit. I put it away, I covered it up after that, I promise. But some of the paint did start to dry. It was still very usable, but I got to use a lot less than I thought I was going to. Honestly, it was just with the colors that I had less of, like the yellows and the purples, so that was good. Moving forward into the future, months later, because this did last for months, but I have done more painting since then, so I had more fresh paint on my palette going into this painting. I have to say it was mostly whites and browns and blacks, which was perfect because I combined those with the red that I had, and it made some of the most beautiful, deep, rich browns, which were perfect for my trees. They came out amazing. I was able to add different shades of yellow, including the old yellow and a little bit of new yellow, because I didn't have enough, because that's one of the colors that started to dry out. And it was great. As I started painting this, I decided I wanted to make it a very loose, almost expressionistic painting. I didn't want to add so much detail. I wanted it to be more light and airy and almost sketchy. Essentially, I was going for more of a illustrative style rather than a realistic landscape. I knew when I saw the color palette from my Halloween oil paints that I wanted to do a winter landscape. The colors were perfect for it. They were the colors that I wanted to use. However, I didn't think that I was going to actually do that. I thought I was going to wind up doing another Halloween themed landscape. So my idea behind it was Little Red Riding Hood. I had this grand idea that I would make it a very spooky, wintry forest that would be very cold and very unappealing, somewhat alluring, but in a dark fantasy type of way. But as I started to mix colors, adding, yellow and blue mixed with this gray, I realized that the colors were more pastel and inviting and lovely, and I realized it was going in a different direction. I then had this idea that Perhaps this was more of a Christmas story, a fairy tale, a winter dream, a winter tale. But it also took a different, completely different feeling and theme to it. Then I decided I was going to think about what winter meant to me, because the main theme that I wanted to stick with was winter. A winter day, a winter morning, a winter night. What did I want it to be? What did I want it to feel like? And the embrace of winter was the main idea. It was everything I wanted it to be. A warm winter day, a warm winter morning. And that's when the concept kind of just fell into place. I stopped thinking as my woman in her cape was Little Red Riding Hood or Mrs. Claus delivering cookies to the workshop. I started thinking of her as a woman of old, on a journey through the woods early in the morning, carrying with her whatever she may need for the coming day, at peace and in love with the scenery. And I thought it to be dreamy, more than illustrative and more than a tale. I wanted it to feel like winter. I wanted it to feel like all the things I love about winter, and I wanted it to be inviting. I created many sketches for this painting, and I felt as though when I was creating them, I didn't want to add a lot of detail, because 9 times out of 10, when you're creating a landscape painting, at least for me, you don't want to add the detail in the sketch. You want to add the detail with the paint, because the way I work, I use many layers. I often take days where I let my painting dry. I take time to think about what I'm working on and how I want my vision to come to life. So what you're seeing is months in the making, months of conceptualizing and drawing and painting and preparation. Going into this painting and mixing of paints, I thought that I would want the snow to be more pastel, less pigmented, but as I was creating, I really decided that I wanted the blues and the purples and the yellows to be quite visible. I wanted there to be a huge contrast, or a big enough contrast where you could see the different layers of snow, of white, of gray, and it kind of came together like a dream. I have to say that adding the branches was one of the more tedious parts, but it was also the most satisfying, because once you could see the branches and how they sprung off of the trees, it was quite lovely. And then putting the snow on them, it was just fantastic. I don't think going into this painting I thought that it would be as snowy as it was, but as I was creating it, I realized that I really did want to embrace that snowy, cold winter, almost lack of color. Here's a sneak peek of how much paint I've actually used at the halfway point. I actually am using the paint that I promised I was going to be using. I just didn't show you guys the mixing. I felt like you guys have seen enough mixing in the beginning. So some of the paint did dry a little bit. I did have to remove a layer of oxidized paint to get to underneath the fresh paint still, but I still got to use almost all the colors. I think the only color I didn't use was green, and that's just because I had a yellow green that I was leaning more towards, and I didn't really need the green because I wasn't doing anything that I wanted green to be on. I did mix a little bit of green in with the brown, but that was just for the trees. I stuck mostly to the blues and the purples for the snow, and using the yellow and the grays and the white for the sunshine, the snow on the trees, and just a little dimension on the ground. The cape, I have to say, was my favorite part. I mixed up so many reds. I actually, by this point, because I used so much red in the trees, had to dig into my stash of red paint, and I had to mix new reds, which was fine because I needed them, and I needed that dimension. I wanted to add more than just one shade of red to give it some more shape, some highlights. As of right now, I'm using some of my more inexpensive reds, and it was great to add as a base layer. It added a lot of dimension. It told me where I needed to put my highlights, but it wasn't vibrant enough for me. So I dug into some of my more expensive reds, some of my more pigmented reds, to really add some highlights, some different shades. Like I added some magenta, some alizarin crimson, some cadmium orange, to brighten and just to make this cape glow. My favorite part of doing the cape was probably these highlights right here. I really liked the way that they looked like the cape was glowing, and it made me want to do more. It made me want to add more highlights and bring more brightness and not be afraid to do that. I'm pretty sure this is where I was 3/4 of the way finished with the painting, and that's my palette as of right now. It gets way messier the more finished I get done, and I'll show you guys a little snap of that right at the end. Nothing like morning sunshine. And to add to that, I guess I couldn't really get the Mrs. Claus thought out of my head, so I added a little bit of white fur to the cloak, to the cape, just a little bit. I just thought it needed it, just a little bit, It added something, it broke up the red, and it also incorporated my lady into the atmosphere and the snowiness. To me, it also added that extra bit of magic to her as well, where she didn't feel out of place. She felt like she was going on an adventure, and I feel like that's the part of this painting that I love the most. The fact that the sun is touching everything in this cold landscape, and it feels as though they're thriving, it's growing with everything, and I really love that. To me, this painting was the closing of winter, so I could finally get into spring. I feel like it couldn't end until I did one more thing, and this was that thing. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm AmberJade. This is Art and Chat, and I hope you enjoyed the video.